Chapter 25. Voldemort changes his plans. January 31, 1996. Death Eater Safe House Kalambasri Lanka Damadharan Dilmi was all set. Everything was in place for the attack. He'd managed to get his hands on a Tamil Tiger armored car and had filled it with fake explosives. If everything went as planned, he would execute his curse, apparate away, and watch as the central bank blew up from a safe distance. The Tamil Tigers would naturally be blamed for the attack. The authorities would never realize that the strange, skull-looking cloud hovering over the crime scene would show who the culprit actually was. He was about to get into the car and drive off to the bank when he caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye. That was more than disturbing, as this people other than Death Eaters were supposedly unable to apparate into the safe house. The few other Death Eaters who had been living in the building were away, and Dilmy had not been expecting them to return any time soon. He turned to look at the visitor, words to a curse on his lips. When he saw who it was, his eyes widened, and he sank to his knees before the pale, noseless face. Voldemort was putting on a confident outward appearance. However, he still seemed a bit disturbed, nervous, and confused. Dilmy could see his mentor fighting to maintain control. What on earth had happened? Could the auras have figured out where he was, forcing him to start running all over the world? Could that be why he was here, in this safe house? He'd find out soon enough, he supposed. "My lord, welcome to Sri Lanka. How may I serve you?" Voldemort looked at him for a moment and frowned. That didn't seem good, Dilmy thought. Finally, the great wizard spoke. "Dilmy, if I remember correctly, you are about to perform an attack on Muggles as the Indian Death Eater's opening salvo in the Second Wizarding War. I see here that you have acquired a Tamil vehicle and will be attempting to frame the tigers when you cast your curse." Dilmy nodded. "I am, my lord. Would you like me to change the plans?" Voldemort paused for a moment. "Circumstances have changed which will affect the wizarding community all over the world. Due to these changes, I am ordering you to call off the attack. We are going to be biding our time, marshalling our forces until the time comes to strike." This was most unexpected, Dilmy thought. Aloud, "As you wish, my lord. May I ask what has changed?" Voldemort stared at him. "You don't know, Dilmy." "No, my lord, should I have? I've been spending most of my time here in the safe house finalizing my plans. What happened?" Voldemort put it bluntly. "Last Sunday night, the statute of secrecy was breached in a way which the Oblivators could not handle. The Pope, the President of the United States, and several other Muggle leaders have all acknowledged the existence of the wizarding community. Several wizards have since advertised their powers on public media. There is no way the Oblivators will be able to recover from this, Mr. Dilmy. The statute of secrecy has been permanently breached. Within a matter of weeks, if not days, 6 billion Muggles all over the world will be aware that they are sharing this planet with wizards." Dilmy couldn't believe this. What? How could this be? What happened? An advertisement shown during a very popular American football game inadvertently picked up footage of a boy flying on a broom. A boy which I have had several encounters with. Dilmy gaped at him. "You mean Harry Potter?" "Yes, our dear friend Harry Potter. I should have killed him when I had the chance, maybe using another Death Eater's wand once my weapon triggered the priori incantatum. There's nothing we can do about that now, though." This advertisement was aired all over the United States before the American Oblivators could eliminate everyone's memories. Once that happened, the statute of secrecy was dead. Dilmy nearly fell over in shock. This was impossible. How could the Americans have screwed up so badly? It must have something to do with Harry Potter. He must have some strange abilities which not only allowed him to survive Voldemort's Avada Kedavra, but to interfere with other wizards' work as well. He steadied himself, however. It would not be appropriate to show signs of weakness before his lord. Turning back to Voldemort, he asked, "How does this change our plans? The Muggles will not know that wizards attacked them, and even if they did, they wouldn't be able to do much about this. Voldemort looked down at the floor. With the Muggles aware of the wizarding community, the authorities conducting the investigation will very likely pore over the debris from your attack with a fine-toothed comb. If they see stuff which doesn't make sense, they will likely suspect wizards. Pure-blooded wizards all over planet will be persecuted and hunted down. If there were a way to frame mudbloods and half-breeds, then it would have been worth it. Otherwise, it would be too risky. The Dark Lord clenched his fists. The only thing we can do is perform an attack which will take out the power base of both the Muggles and the undesirable wizards, leaving the purebloods in command. This attack will take a long time to organize, however. We cannot tip our hands beforehand with small attacks like this one. Dilmy couldn't believe what he was hearing. My lord, I can understand getting rid of the mudbloods, and I fully agree with you that the Muggles should be ruled by their superiors, the wizards. But how would you perform an attack powerful enough to incapacitate the Muggle forces? There are so many Muggles on this planet that it would have to be extraordinarily powerful, not to mention dangerous in case we fail. Furthermore, if we kill all the Muggles, whom will we rule? Voldemort shrugged. We just kill enough Muggles to make them swear loyalty to us and enforce it with an unbreakable vow. I suspect that it won't take any more than a few 100 million people to get the job done. That's less than 10% of the population of the world. Dilmy shook his head. That's good to hear, my lord. However, a few 100 million people is still a lot of people. I don't recall anyone in history killing that many people in one blow. Even Hitler and Stalin didn't reach that casualty total with the weight of a powerful regime at their back. Voldemort glared at him. You forget that I am probably the most powerful wizard who has ever lived, Dilmy. Furthermore, the damned ick tests they gave me at the orphanage came back with a score of 173, indicating that I was extremely smart even before I became aware of my magical abilities. If there is a way to do this, I will find it. That I swear to you. The fact that the Muggles and wizards will start interacting more may give us access to Muggle technology, which will help a great deal, especially if we enhance some of the Muggle technology with magic. Dilmy nodded. Voldemort had a point. I understand, my lord. Good. Now give back the Muggle vehicle and stand by until I've got more information on how we're going to pull this off. I will, my lord. Voldemort smiled grimly. With that, he disappeared in a flash of apparition, leaving behind a troubled, yet confident Dilmy. Chapter 26. Newspaper Headlines. Update 26, January 31, 1996, Daily Prophet Publication, Headquarters London. England Daily Prophet Extra Edition Wednesday, 31 January 1996, Statute of Secrecy breached. Super Bowl commercial captures Harry Potter on broomstick. Blast Cola ad shown to millions before Oblivators could complete job. President Clinton, Pope admit existence of wizards to world. HRH Queen Elizabeth Roman II to speak at Hogwarts with PM Major. Ministry of Magic, London. It all began half a year ago with a simple flight of wizards through a dark London night. These trained men and women were escorting the young Harry Potter to a ministry-sponsored safe house after what appears to have been a misguided dementor attack in the village of Little Winging. The wizards flew under the cover of darkness over the Thames, far away from any prying eyes. Unknown to them, some Muggles were filming a commercial for the championship match of the American National Football League from a boat on the Thames. Film is a Muggle means of recording information, such as our familiar wizarding cameras. It can be used to create moving pictures similar to our own. For some reason, Harry Potter, a child with the flair for the dramatic and a tendency to flaunt the statute of secrecy, flew too close to the boat and was caught on film. Whether it was intentional or accidental is unknown. Regardless of how it happened, however, footage of the so-called Chosen One made it across the pond to the United States despite the valiant efforts of our Oblivators. The American Oblivators did their best to stop the leak. However, additional copies of the footage began propagating throughout the country. Although the Oblivators managed to get most of the copies, the original footage eventually made it to the headquarters of the National Broadcasting Corporation in time for the Super Bowl. The commercial was then aired to millions of Americans with Harry Potter and his broomstick clearly visible. Once the commercial was broadcast to these millions of people, stopping the leak became impossible. The Oblivators would have had to travel all over the country, erasing the memories of virtually everyone they saw. To make matters worse, us army soldiers watching the match outside the country spread the leak outside the United States. These two incidents, combined with the posting of the Potter footage on an international network, forced the ministry to shift its focus from preventing the leak to minimizing the damage and preparing the wizards for inevitable discovery by the Muggle world. Rest assured that we at the Ministry of Magic are doing everything possible to prepare the magical community of Britain for its introduction to the Muggle world. The Queen and Prime Minister will be speaking at Hogwarts, explaining what life is like in the Muggle world and quite possibly how the two communities can benefit from interacting with each other. I would like to emphasize that the Muggles are not all out to kill every single witch they see. Far from it. The anti-witch Muggles are few and far between. The vast majority are ordinary human people like you and me who are very likely curious about this odd new community in their midst. Treat Muggles the way you always have, with dignity and respect. If they ask if you are a wizard, only say yes if you are comfortable doing so. Remember that a Muggle's first impression of the wizarding world may have lasting consequences. The perpetrator of the breach, Harry Potter, has been sentenced to house arrest. His mentor and accomplice, Albus Dumbledore, has decided to retire at the end of the year, leaving Hogwarts in the able hands of Minerva McGonagall and Dolores Umbridge. Professor Umbridge is a ministry-sponsored defense against the dark arts teacher, more than capable of implementing any necessary reforms. Hogwarts has already modified the curriculum to prepare our young witches and wizards for interaction with the Muggles. Muggle studies courses have become compulsory, with 2 lessons occurring per day. Various Muggle speakers, starting with the Queen and Prime Minister, will be coming in to visit Hogwarts several times over the next few weeks. The schedule will be posted to all wizarding homes by Ministry Owls. Anyone who wishes to attend may do so. Remember that it is not possible to apparate into Hogwarts. In return, several Hogwarts students will be accompanying older wizards into Muggle London to see some of the important Muggle sites. All of you are welcome to join up on these expeditions. We expect that this introduction to the Muggle world will help you immensely in the weeks and months to come. Thank you for your cooperation, and we will update you when any new information becomes available. February 1, 1996, New York Times publication, Headquarters, New York, United States of America. Wizards among us. Associated Press, son of a gun. It was a wizard after all. In a pair of astonishing announcements over the last couple of days, President Clinton, Pope John Paul Roman II, and several other influential figures confirmed the rumors that wizards have been living among humans as we know them since time immemorial. Furthermore, His Holiness demonstrated unequivocally that he himself is a wizard, magically increasing the size of a dove before setting it forth to freedom. The announcements elicited reactions from people all over the world. Stephen Hawking, the famous scientist, stated that the discovery of magic will likely transform science and lead to future revolutions in physics and technology. Carl Sagan waxed eloquently about a new way to imagine and view the universe. Even Vice President Gore praised magic as possibly providing a means to provide humanity with an unlimited supply of energy, one which could be tapped without using fossil fuels and ruining the environment. The Secretary of Magic, Travis H. Radner, explained that the wizards have traditionally hidden themselves because in the old days, uninformed villagers and peasants were afraid of magic and persecuted those with the gift. Furthermore, Radner had been concerned that Muggles, non-magical people like you and me, would begin overwhelming the wizards for requests to do fantastic things, some of which were impossible even for wizards. There have been times, Radner reports, where ordinary people attacked wizards for refusing to do something, not realizing that the wizards physically could not do it. Take, for example, raising the dead. Secretary Radner recently reported that the dead cannot be raised through magic any more easily than they can be raised through medicine. Food cannot be created from nothing, nor can money. Radner explained that although magic is good at making difficult tasks easier, it does not allow the caster to perform tasks which are inherently impossible. Radner claims that the wizards live among us in secret communities known only to the members of the wizarding community. To prove his claim, he is willing to take a television crew into one of these wizarding sanctuaries to show how the wizards work and live. At the request of several members of a secret wizarding community in Arizona, a Blast Cola representative who had been involved in filming the wizards in the first place has been allowed to serve as the community's first Muggle wizard ambassador. Isaac Sanders, 29, of Prescott, has offered to help the wizards acclimate themselves to the outside world. Mr. Sanders was horrified when he realized what he had done, and he felt it was upon him to make amends. He also testified to the work of another Blast employee, David Stern, 43, to attempt to hide knowledge of the wizards before it became too widely disseminated. Unfortunately, Mr. Stern was not in a position to discuss the issue due to technical reasons. If you encounter someone who acts in an unusual way, do not assume he or she is a wizard. He or she may just be an eccentric muggle. The same goes for people interested in magic who may dress like wizards. Only assume that a person is a wizard if he or she casts spells or does something else to confirm that he or she is a wizard. If you do encounter a wizard, realize that real wizards are probably nothing like their fantasy counterparts. Asking them to do things fantasy wizards can do may be offensive to them. Work will be done to break down these pre-existing stereotypes. Remember, first and foremost, that wizards are people like us and should be treated accordingly. They are human beings, not curiosities. Chapter 27. Not in Kansas anymore. February 2, 1996, Sanders household Prescott, Arizona, United States of America. Melissa Sanders stared at the odd-looking powder and then back at Strong Bear. You want us to do what? Throw the powder into the fireplace and wait for the green fire to appear. Once it's there, walk into the flames and speak the words, Fourth Mesa, quite precisely. The spell will then transport you to Fourth Mesa. You want us to walk into a patch of green fire. Is this powder going to explode? It won't explode, Mrs. Sanders. The fire is magical and will not harm you. It is designed to make transportation easier. Isaac Izzy, Sanders put a hand on his wife's shoulder. Don't worry, Melissa. He's told me about this means of transport. Turning back to Strong Bear, he asked, Are you sure that this method can be used to transport Muggles? Strong Bear nodded. Yes, Mr. Sanders. Once the flu powder has been created, anyone can use it, even Muggles. If you think about it, it's just a tool. You don't need to know how to create a tool in order to use it. Izzy whistled and looked at the powder again. This could be very useful in the Muggle world, a cheap and instantaneous means of transportation. Can I show some to the people at the University of Phoenix? Can you go anywhere you want? Certainly, take some over to the university. As for the other question, the flu powder connects you to what is, in effect, a magical highway system. It gets you onto the highway, but it won't do you much good unless there is an exit ramp where you want to go. Fireplaces and caves make good exit ramp locations. If you want to connect your fireplace to the system, contact me or another wizard. We'll hook you up and give you an ample supply of powder. Izzy nodded, spilled some of the flu powder into one of his wife's old lipstick tubes, and pocketed it. All right. Now let's see how we do this. I need something to look forward to after a long day at work. Strong Bear nodded and poured a handful of the powder into his hand. He then tossed it nonchalantly into the fireplace. The fireplace filled with green flames. Both Muggles gasped, and Izzy told Strong Bear to hold off so he could get a video camera. Once the film was rolling, Strong Bear walked into the field of view, showed the viewer the flue powder, and explained what was going to happen. He then turned back to the Muggles. Remember, enter the flames, state your destination precisely, Fourth Mesa, and the magic will send you there. I'll see you on the other side. With that, Strong Bear walked into the flames, spoke the words Fourth Mesa, and vanished. Melissa stared at her husband. Ah, that's different. Izzy laughed. Indeed it is, Melissa. Go ahead, go on through. I'll videotape you. Trying to convince Melissa to appear on a videotape was about as difficult as convincing water to run downhill. Drawing a deep breath, she walked into the flames, said the words Fourth Mesa, and vanished. Making sure the camera was still running, he followed her into the flames and spoke the words. He yelped as he was wrenched off his feet and felt himself flying in various strange directions. Strange lights whizzed by him in a scene reminiscent of the Stargate scene at the end, 2001, A Space Odyssey. A brief look at the camera indicated that it was still operational. He couldn't wait to show this film to his friends and to the people at the university who'd be working with the flue powder. The wormhole ended abruptly, and Izzy suddenly found himself sliding out of a fireplace in a building he'd never seen before. One glance around the room made him whistle in surprise. He most definitely was not in Kansas anymore. The room was filled with strangely dressed men and women. Some were in purple robes, some were in blue robes, and some were dressed in hues which looked like they had been developed in by someone on an LSD high. Strange symbols lined the walls, which were covered with Native American decorations. Paper airplanes flew throughout the room, moving apparently by themselves. He barely had the wherewithal to bring up the video camera and start recording. His wife was looking around as well, also completely stunned. He was about to say something when a hand suddenly grabbed him and pulled him out of the fireplace. Glaring at Strong Bear, he was about to complain when a short, stout woman materialized in the fireplace. That would have been messy, he thought. Good thing Strong Bear pulled me out of the way. He brushed off his pants as several people surrounded him, his wife and Strong Bear. They were all dressed in matching robes and had wands in their hands. The leader, a tall man who appeared to be Zuni, stepped forward and shook his hand. Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Sanders. I'm Two Bear Lance, head of this facility. We at the Dine Center for Shamanism and Sorcery are more than grateful for your assistance in helping acclimate the wizarding world to its new circumstances. One thing that I do request is that, although you may use your video camera during this visit, please follow our instructions as to what areas of the facility you can film. There are sections of this facility which are considered classified, even to several ranks of wizards, and we would prefer that you not film those. In return for your help, we'd like to provide you with a few gifts. First, allow me to present you a case of Green Eagle Butterbeer, a drink popular in the wizarding world. It is mildly alcoholic, so please don't drive your Muggle vehicle after drinking it. Mrs. Sanders, as you are 2 months along, we don't want you drinking it either. Melissa stared at him. You realized I was pregnant. Yes, Mrs. Sanders. Magic can do amazing things. At any rate, here's our second gift, an old broomstick. It is in perfect working order, though I highly discourage you from experimenting with it. Magical items which require active manipulation will not work when used by Muggles. You will not be able to ride a broom unless it is being piloted by a wizard. Izzy smiled and accepted the gifts. Thank you, Two Bear. In return, I've got some gifts for you. First, I've got a case of Blast Cola for you, courtesy of my current employer. It's a typical example of soft drinks used by Muggles. Second, I've got a digital wristwatch, complete with countdown and stopwatch routines. Muggles use it to tell time. What do you use? Two Bear nodded. Thank you, Mr. Sanders. The more Muggle artifacts we have to work with, the better. Now, if you'd please follow me, we can begin the tour. As far as telling time goes, we use hourglasses and similar devices, as well as clocks with an ungodly number of hands. Chapter 28. A Bright Light in a Troubled Regime. February 3, 1996, Collective Farm PX 311 outside of Pyongyang Democrat People's Republic of Korea, Choi-Yon. Me couldn't believe what had happened. The statute of secrecy had been breached. The North Korean government hadn't mentioned anything about it her country's wizards, which made sense to some extent. After all, the dear leader was the only real source of power in the land. He probably wouldn't like to advertise the possibility that there may be other means by which people could exercise power. Yet the news had spread. She had received several owls from wizards in South Korea. The dear leader thought he had the government under control, which he did, for all practical purposes. However, he was a Muggle, and Muggles never realized that owls could be used to send messages. Supposedly, the leak had begun when a British wizard had appeared on a commercial filmed for an American sporting event. A tape of this event had made it into the hands of a South Korean bartender, a Mr. Sung, and the bartender had nearly had a heart attack when he realized that the footage had managed to record a boy flying a broom. Bartenders like to tell stories, of course, so inevitably copies of the film, along with increasingly exaggerated descriptions of the wizard, started spreading throughout the area. The South Korean Ministry of Magic had eventually managed to obviate all of the leaks in the country. Unfortunately, the leaks continued to worsen all over the world, and eventually the footage began to reappear in Seoul. The ministry, forced to admit that this leak wouldn't go away, had eventually come out to the chief of state. The chief of state had made a speech to the people, explaining that wizards existed and they were to be treated with respect, like honored ancestors and wise men. Pyongyang, of course, boasted that the South Koreans were so nervous about the North Koreans' military strength that they were relying on fantasy figures to keep up with the DPRK. Choi-Yon knew the truth, however. She was in fact a witch, though no one outside the wizarding community knew. She had toiled for years in the fields, working in the rice paddies with her bare hands, knowing that all of this could be done with magic. Unfortunately, due to the statute of secrecy, she could not use her gifts to help make work easier for her and the rest of the women in her paddy. She had been forced to watch as several old women died of exhaustion and malnutrition in the fields. Things would change now that the statute was obsolete. Every single injury, cry of fatigue, and death in the paddies had torn at her heartstrings. She had prayed to see the day when the statute of secrecy had been removed and she would be able to magic to help people. She would do whatever she could to improve the typical North Korean peasant's way of life. Reaching into a pocket of her robe, she pulled out an object which looked to the Muggles to be an ordinary piece of wood. It wasn't, however. Supposedly, the wand had been made at Oblivators hundreds of years ago and was still in good working order. It had held up to years of toiling in the fields. Now it was time to bring that toiling to an end. Whom would she help first? Certainly she can't help herself while others were suffering. That would have been morally reprehensible and more suited to the dear leader than a normal person. The decision was made for her a few minutes later when she heard a scream followed by a splash. Brandishing her wand in front of her like a weapon, she raced towards the sound. An old woman had been carrying some baskets and tripped on a root. Several bowls of rice were floating away down a river, where the old woman was crying in pain. She knelt down next to the old woman. "Madame, are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman just howled and pointed at her leg. The leg was clearly broken, and water festering with parasites was in the process of infiltrating her system. This could be a serious injury. Choi-Yoon took a deep breath and took the plunge. "Madame, hold still. I think I'll be able to help you. However, I'm going to have to do something a bit unusual. Is that all right with you?" The woman managed to stop sobbing long enough to nod. "Please, young woman, anything to stop the pain. It hurts, Ancestors, it hurts. All right, hold still and let me work my magic. Please help me. Choi Yoon put one hand on the injured woman's shoulder and brought out her wand with the other hand. It was now or never. Focusing on her patient, she muttered the incantation. The old woman let out a shriek of surprise and looked at her leg. Ancestors, take me. The pain is dissipating. It looks healthy. What did you do? How did you do it? Madame, I can tell you, but it's going to be a bit of a shock. Tell me, I am in your debt. Choi Yoon took another deep breath before she continued. I am a magician, madame. I belong to a society of magicians who can actually cast spells to help people. We have kept ourselves secret for the most part because people are often frightened of us, even though we mean you no harm. The old woman stared at her. You actually cast a spell to help me. I find it hard to believe. Yes, madame. I can understand your skepticism. If you want more proof of my good intentions, here it is. Choi Yoon waved her wand, and several rows of rice plants suddenly shucked their precious grains and deposited them in a bowl. She then cast another spell to carry the bowl back to the old woman. She handed the bowl to the old woman. Here is some more rice to make up for what you lost. If there is anything you or anyone else who knows me need help with, just ask. Now that I will be able to use my magic in public, I will be able to do much more for you. The old woman looked at the bowl in disbelief. I can't believe this. My prayers have been answered. Are you a spirit? No, madame. I am just another human being like yourself. However, I have a gift which allows me to help people in unusual ways, and it is incumbent upon me to use this gift wisely. The old woman got to her feet and gingerly put her weight on her formerly hurt foot. It held her weight easily, and she let out an excited laugh. I am indeed in your debt. I apologize that I made you reveal your secret. Choi Yoon shook her head. It's not a secret anymore. The existence of magicians has been revealed to the world. We will now be able to help people without worrying about anything. The old woman gave her a hug and started running towards another part of the paddy. Thank you so much, madame. Now, if you could come with me, I've got a sister who's got arthritis and a husband who can't lift rocks anymore. Chapter 29, Delayed Release Spell. Update 29, February 3, 1996 Dine Center for Shamanism and Sorcerifth Mesa, Arizona, United States of America. Mark Willis winced and glared at the half-empty can of Blast Cola. They call this a soft drink. Strong Bear nodded. They do indeed, Mark. What do you think of it? I can't stand it. It has no taste. I like butterbeer a lot better. Do all Muggle soft drinks taste like this? No, Mark. This is just one brand of soft drink, Blast Cola. There are others as well, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Sprite, and so forth. Each of those has their own taste. Would you like to try some of those? Next time we see the Sanderses, I'll ask them to bring some. Little Cloud shook his sparkling white head. I don't think that's a good idea, Strong Bear. They might be offended. After all, Isaac works for Blast Cola. This Coke, or whatever it is, must be a competitor. I think you should let him send you more Blast, even though you don't like it all that much. Maybe some other people in the building may like it. Mark grimaced. You're a ghost, Little Cloud. You don't need to worry about being forced to drink it. Little Cloud nodded. True, I do have a bit of an advantage there. Do they have any other products which you can sample? Strong Bear thought for a moment. They've got Diet Blast, Caffeine Blast, Spice Blast, Passion Fruit Blast. Little Cloud stared at him. Passion Fruit Blast. The Muggles have developed the equivalent of a fruit drink that induces passion in people. They've invented a love potion. All heads turned in unison as a laughing two-bear walked into the room. No, Little Cloud. There is actually a fruit known as a passion fruit. It's found in tropical climates in Central and South America. Despite its name, it is not capable of inducing passion in humans. Rest assured, my sparkling friend, that the secret of love potions remains safely part of our domain. Little Cloud smiled. That's good to hear. Two Bear. How was the rest of the Sanderses' tour of the facility? They seemed completely stunned at half the stuff they saw. Mrs. Sanders nearly fell over when she saw me. Strong Bear chuckled. I remember that little cloud. Muggles tend to do that whenever they see ghosts. I suspect that when this video becomes public, you are going to become a rather popular topic. Little Cloud frowned. How so? Mark Willis explained. Muggles, from what I learned in Muggle studies, have never had documented proof of an afterlife before. Sure, they've had legends of haunted houses, but you're the first ghost they have ever actually recorded a conversation with. Believe me, they're going to be floored. Religious leaders all over the planet are going to have to do some fast thinking. Two Bear laughed even harder. They will indeed. At any rate, back to the Sanderses' tour. We basically gave them the tour we usually give to top-secret government officials and other wizards. They saw the school, the potion-making facility, the peyote garden, and conducted some interviews with the staff. They tried to get into a dine-only powwow, but we blocked access before they could reveal any of the tribe's secrets. We finally showed them a few magical items and let them go with a broom and some butterbeer. Little Cloud was incredulous. You gave them a broom. They can't fly brooms. Two Bear nodded. That's what I'm suspecting, Little Cloud. Had our theorists believed that they would actually be able to use the broom, we wouldn't have given it to them because it would have been extremely dangerous. They don't want to fall off at 5,000 feet. They'd make a really big mess. Ancestors take me. I still don't like it when my nephew flies around, and he's had a broom for a year already. I see. Did they like the butterbeer? They did indeed. They did indeed. Maybe this will be our contribution to Muggle society, something that people can actually drink. Which reminds me, I believe the Sanders' other contribution from the Muggle world is actually of some use to us. Strong Bear was intrigued. The wristwatch. Yes, if you'd follow us, we can show you what we've been doing with it. Strong Bear, Little Cloud, and Willis headed down the corridors after Two Bear. Little Cloud amused himself en route by flying through people, much to their chagrin. He'd been a bit of a practical joker in real life, and nothing much appeared to have changed. The four men headed into a small laboratory and walked over to an examination table. There was the wristwatch, sitting on the table. Next to the watch was a wand and an area which appeared to have been burnt slightly. The rest of the table was empty. Two Bear pointed at the watch. This device has a countdown feature as well as an alarm. When the countdown reaches 0, it starts beeping. We've managed to concoct a magical field which will keep a spell in suspended animation until triggered by a sound. Link it to the beeping from the watch, set the timer or alarm, and you can have the spell cast whenever you want, even if you're not there. Watch, no pun intended. Everyone watched as he cast a couple of spells in preparation. When everything was ready, he picked up the watch and set it for a 1-minute countdown. He started the countdown, put down the watch, and picked up the wand. He waved it at the table. Incendio minimus. Nothing happened, and he picked up the wand. Normally, a small flame would have burst from the end of the wand. However, due to the stasis field, the spell was placed in suspension. Strong Bear whistled. I can sense the magic in the air. The field definitely seems to have recorded the spell. Impressive. Can the same field shoot off multiple spells at different times? Two Bear frowned. In theory, yes. In practice, however, it's not that easy. The spells are activated by the sound, not the time. As a result, all the spells will go off when the alarm goes off. Now look, the countdown is about to end. Everyone was silent as the countdown reached 0. The watch started beeping. A fraction of a second later, a burst of flame appeared over the table. It seemed to have originated from where the wand had been before the wand had been removed from the stasis field. Willis whistled. Impressive, very impressive. Two Bear beamed. I thought you'd like it. Give us a little more time, and little gadgets like this will be able to work wonders for our society. You'd be amazed at what functionality these new digital devices has that our traditional pocket watches don't. Chapter 30. A Visit to Irontree. February 4, 1996, outside H. MacGregor House, 450 Memorial Drive, Cambridge, Massachusetts, United States of America. The dorm's central courtyard was filled with reporters, students, parents helping undergrads move back on campus after intersession, and various people associated with the Society for Creative Anachronism and Assassins Guild. For the first time, the history of the MIT, I-entry, was going to be shown to the Muggles. MacGregor House consisted of a 16-floor tower attached to an L-shaped low-rise building. The dormitory consisted of 9 major living areas, better known as entries, as each area shared a common entry. Entries A, B, C, D, and E were in the tower. Entries F, G, H, and J comprised the low-rise. Each entry had its own personality and intramural sports teams, such as the E-entry Executioners and F-entry Vigilantes. Originally an all-male dorm, 8 of the 9 entries had gone co-ed over the past few years. When C-entry went co-ed in the fall of 1994, F-entry found itself as the only entry left which did not include women. The fact that I-entry was missing from the list was obvious to even the most casual observer. The only reference to an I-entry stood in an internal corridor connecting H and J entries. It consisted of a brick wall with a big capital letter I painted on it. Many people believed that the letter I had been omitted from the list because it could have been confused with J. That explanation, however, had gone out the window less than 48 hours ago when a shocking announcement echoed through the institute. I-entry existed, just like the other ones. It even had its own sports team, the I-entry Incantations. The only reason it didn't compete with the other 9 entries was simple. No one else at MIT played quadpot or even Quidditch. I-entry housed the Magical Technology Division of the United States Department of Magic. The place was chock full of wizards which had been operating under the Muggles' noses since time immemorial. The entry had a special portal linking it to the headquarters of the Department of Magic in Greenwich. Since Greenwich was hidden under the waters of the Quabbin, ordinary wizards and witches living outside the 4 towns often found it difficult to access the ministry headquarters. Employees could apparate into it. Visitors, however, could not, which necessitated a visitor entrance. I-entry lived up to its name, dutifully allowing wizarding visitors access to the ministry through the experimental technology section. I-entry had handled its affairs quietly and in secrecy for years on end. That period of tranquility had ended, however, a few days ago, when the president had revealed the existence of the wizards to the world following the Super Bowl breach. Requests had been coming in from all over the country to send a camera crew into a wizard stronghold to show the Muggles how the wizards lived. After a brief hesitation, Secretary Radner had agreed. After a hasty consultation with Professor Nagel of the Quabbin Academy for Sorcery, arrangements were made to allow a news crew into wizard territory at the very least, I-entry, in one of the submerged towns. Radner had refused to allow them into the department headquarters itself for security reasons. However, the civilian areas were fair game. The authorities had tried to keep the visit secret. However, a whole bunch of Alpha Chi Gamma hackers had joined forces, led by the kid who had introduced the leak to the internet to begin with, to break into a government website, and the secret was soon out. Needless to say, MIT was furious at being hoodwinked. Harvard, with its powerful alumni and large endowment, complained that all the schools in Cambridge should have known about this. As if that were not bad enough, various octogenarians who had been evicted from the 4 towns back in 1938 started shouting at everyone strange-looking that they wanted their houses back. At precisely 12:00, Travis Radner and his bodyguard apparated onto the walkway leading to the entrance to G-entry above the former cafeteria. His arrival was noticed immediately by the crowd, who started clapping, chattering, cheering excitedly. Several students started making Star Trek jokes and transporter noises. Radner, however, had been expecting this. He waved to the crowd and told them to join them. This resulted in a stampede out of the courtyard, past the entrance to the high-rise, and around the 180-degree turn-up the staircase. The television floodlights reflected off the bald secretary's head as he proceeded down the hall to the entrance to H entry. Two people, a man and woman, met him at the door. The man looked to be a graduate student, maybe in his mid to late 20s. The woman, a striking blonde, appeared a few years younger than him, perhaps only a year or two older than the seniors. Radner bowed to the two people. "Good afternoon. I take it one of you is the master for H entry." The man nodded. "I'm the graduate residence tutor, if that's what you mean. I take it you're involved with the Department of Magic and are going to be conducting the tour of I entry." Radner nodded. "We are, sir. You two are more than welcome to come along." He then looked a bit closer at the woman. He had a knack for finding Vila features in people, and the woman's features screamed Vila to him. Sure enough, the features were there faint, but there. She was probably only 132 Vila or less, to the point where it was quite possible she didn't know her Vila ancestors, but Vila traits tended to be dominant, and as a result took a long time to die out completely. Very interesting, he thought. Here was a descendant of a Vila who probably didn't even know what a Vila even was. A pity, he thought. Hopefully, the mingling of the wizard and Muggle societies would help correct this mistake. However, it made him wonder if there was a continuum between wizard and Muggle, or in general, between any magical species such as Vila and Muggle. Judging from what he knew of evolution, it was quite possible, especially since most wizard families were not purebreeds. A comment from the GRT interrupted his musings. "Sure, we'll come along. We've seen that eye painted on the bricks for all these years. I am kind of curious what's back there." "You'll find out soon enough, young man. Now follow me, and we'll head over to I entry." The grad student and his consort joined the crowd as Radner led them through the halls towards I entry, or at least tried to. The halls were narrow, as was often the case with dormitories. Crates and boxes from people moving in were littering the way. Radner cast some hovering charms to make them hover temporarily in midair so that the crowd could walk by. This affected a huge cheer from the crowd, followed by a bunch of photographs. The reporters and Radner caught sight of the painted eye on the wall about the time the last few members of the mob had made it through the door leading to H entry. The line snaked all the way through the living group, trapping several students in their dorm rooms. As if that were not bad enough, several of the students had started racing in through J entry and were closing in from the other side. The entire west side of the low-rise was paralyzed. Travis raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. Slowly, respectfully, he walked up to the painted eye. He pulled out his wand. Cameras went off everywhere as all the reporters turned their cameras in his direction. He reached out with the wand, tapped the four corners of the eye, and then traced his wand down the central spine. For a few seconds, nothing happened. People began to mutter. Then the two halves of the eye began to pivot back into the brick wall. What had been the central spine of the eye was widening into a passageway beyond what was an obvious double door. More cameras flashed as the students roared. Radner turned back to the crowd and beamed. "I entry, shall we?" The students cheered as he began leading the crowd down the corridor. This lucky group of 500 Muggles would be boldly going where no one had gone before. It took about 5 minutes for everyone to make their way through the corridors and into the passage. 10 seconds after the last Muggle entered, the double doors pivoted closed, and the painted eye was an eye once more. Chapter 31, I Entry Office Tour. February 4, 1996. I Entradana, Massachusetts, United States of America. It was only a matter of time now, thought Daniel Meeks. Sorcerer First Class Meeks was the head of the Department of Magical Technology, often known by its Muggle name I Entry. It would be he who would be leading Secretary Radner and the reporters on a tour of the facility, showing the Muggles wizards at work and what exactly they did for a living. He would then hand the tourists off to Professor Nagel, who would take them on a tour of the CAS. Finally, the Muggles would be allowed to wander into the community, speak with a few people who had volunteered to talk to them, and watch an intercity quadpart match between Prescott and Enfield. He hoped that this first contact, or at least very early contact, would be relatively straightforward and peaceful. Secretary Radner had done his best to make the tour low-key. Ideally, only 5 or 6 reporters would be taking the tour. If other Muggles found out, they would be allowed to come along. However, Sorcerer Meeks didn't think they would find out until it was too late. It was a good thing, however. The more Muggles on the tour, the more likely things were to get out of control. There were things here Muggles shouldn't mess around with, especially wands, which really did not like being handled by non-magical beings. The aforementioned secretary, meanwhile, had his hands full. He hadn't expected all these people, to say the least. His hopes for a small audience had been dashed, and he'd probably have faced a riot had he told them they couldn't go. A riot during a first contact situation was never a good idea, particularly where most of the people were young men with a penchant for mischief. The fact that there was evidence of a possible Vila descendant in the group didn't help either. He closed his eyes and shook his head. There wasn't much he could do about it now. All he could do is hope for the best. Meeks focused his attention on the door as he heard voices on the other side of the door. He recognized Radner's voice, as well as a general background hum which he assumed was the reporters talking to each other. Radner was giving final instructions. "All right, everyone. This is the main entrance right here. It's wizard-locked, so stand back while I open the door. Remember, do not touch anything, particularly wands. Several of our magical items can be dangerous if used improperly. You are free to interview anyone or record anything unless we say otherwise. However, do not touch anything. Got it?" A chorus of rights echoed into the room. Meeks frowned. There were at least 15-20 people in there. A bit more than he had hoped, but probably still manageable. Radner's voice then returned. The secretary cast a spell, and the door slid open to reveal Radner surrounded by what appeared to be television cameras. Alarm bells went off in Meeks's head. The secretary seemed a little frazzled. It was understandable, however. Controlling a group of 20 excited tourists would probably be more difficult than controlling a group of 5 or 6. He didn't let anything show, however, as he walked up to Radner with the television cameras rolling. He shook the secretary's hands, followed by those of a few of the Muggles in the first rank. He had a strange suspicion that this set of handshakes would be shown all over the world in the months to come. "Good afternoon, Secretary Radner and our new Muggle friends. Welcome to the Magical Technology Division of the American Department of Magic. My name is Sorcerer First Class Daniel Jonathan Meeks. I'm the head of this facility, and I'll be taking you on your tour. Whatever you do, don't touch anything and don't wander away from the group. If you need to use the restroom, tell us and we will find someone to accompany you." As the secretary said, there are several objects here which don't work well with Muggles. Now, if you reporters could come in, you can start looking around the room so the rest of the tourists can come in. There was a loud cheer from the corridor, and Meeks's alarm bells began clanging more loudly. That sounded like a lot more than 20 people. He'd know for certain soon, however. A few seconds later, the last television camera and spotlight moved out of the way, allowing Meeks to look into the corridor. For the first time, he could see how many people were going to be taking the tour. Oh, he thought the group was just too large for one person to lead properly. There were Muggles everywhere, gaping at all of the flying letters and moving photographs. There were at least 100 people in the first 3 rooms already, and a glance down the corridor heading back to MacGregor seemed to show no end in sight to the stream. Meeks had to do something, and do it fast. He grabbed several low-level workers and drafted them into service as tour guides. This done, he shoved his way over to the door and started waving off the people. That didn't work very well, so he found himself forced to cast an anti-Muggle shield across the door, much to the guests' chagrin. Bizarrely, one of them still managed to get in even though he identified as a Muggle. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, but we can't handle any more visitors right now. We were only expecting 10-20 people, and so far we've got maybe 150. The rest of you will have to come back later." The Muggles grumbled for a while. However, Meeks wasn't worried as he had a backup plan which would be a very good booby prize. "If you would be so good to return to MacGregor House, you will find that I have sent my house elf Thomas to the far end of the corridor, just inside the door leading to the dormitory. He will give each of you a magical token, allowing you to enter I-entry 1 week from now. You'll like Thomas. I doubt you've ever seen a real-life elf before." He then gave them the bad news. "Once I've gotten all of you out of the corridor and back into MacGregor House, the I-entry door will be closed. I'm sorry, but we just can't handle anyone else right now. To use your colloquialism, we're sold out until next week." The Muggles' murmuring turned to excitement, littered with comments about Santa Claus, J.R.R. Tolkien, and Dungeons and Dragons. Meeks groaned. Muggle stereotypes about elves were not particularly realistic. They probably were expecting cute creatures like in movies, and were going to be disappointed when confronted with reality. This last set of comments did the trick, and the Muggles began to head back up the corridor towards the dormitory. He could hear a rather surprised Thomas trying to explain what was going on in the distance, while simultaneously trying to fend off probes from at least 6 biology majors meanwhile. Radner was leading one of the various smaller tour groups through the compound. Some of them guides were accompanied by video cameras, and some weren't. The secretary and his bodyguard, of course, warranted a camera. There was nearly an incident when the Muggles almost broke out laughing, when a potion manufacturer couldn't identify the mysterious Muggle object as a television camera. One of the Muggles, a blonde woman who looked to be of Vila heritage, of all things told them to be more polite, and they did. Meeks turned to her and thanked her for her assistance. Of course, he never saw the mischievous hacker dip a test tube into a cauldron and pocket something which would eventually prove to be a hair restoration potion. He did, however, manage to catch someone trying to make off with a broom. His tour was fairly comprehensive. He showed the Muggles the potion development cauldrons and several magic items, seen from a distance. He transformed teacups into mice, much to the crowd's amazement. He demonstrated a few basic spells, such as Lumos and Wingardium Leviosa. The reporters, of course, took it all in. They interviewed him, Weeks, and several other people extensively. Finally, it was over. He led his charges out of the building and towards the school, where Professor Nagel awaited them. The headmaster seemed a bit concerned at the size of the group, but Nagel assured him that he'd manage. The mob had been remarkably well behaved. When the damage report came in, all the Muggles seemed to have run away with were a remembrall, how had they gotten that, and a self-cleaning plate. Not surprisingly, the biology students had taken a DNA sample from Thomas the Goblin. Thankfully, no wands or brooms. It could have been worse, a lot worse. All in all, a not unreasonable first contact. Chapter 32, Rowdy Classroom. February 4, 1996, Quabbin Academy of Sorcery, Dana Academydana, Massachusetts, United States of America. Stephen Reynolds watched as the mob approached the school gates. He considered himself to an expert on Muggles. He had been serving as the Muggle Studies teacher for 8 years now and was admired by most of his students. He described Muggle customs to him the best he could. Some of them, such as the airplane, were rather surprising. Many of the boys, including the 11th and 12th graders, couldn't imagine what life would be like if you couldn't apparate or fly a broom. Everything had changed over the past week. Everything. For the first time in his life, his students would be able to grade him on his lessons much like he had graded theirs. He would be in big trouble if the Muggles approaching the gate with the headmaster didn't act the way he was expecting them to. The Cass had found out about the Super Bowl commercial relatively quickly. To his credit, Professor Nagel had responded quickly and decisively, explaining to the students what had happened and quarantining the school from possible exposure to the Muggles. The 3 hours which had been cleared for watching the Super Bowl tape instead hosted a mandatory Muggle studies class focusing on the history of interaction between Muggles and wizards. By now, of course, the Oblivators had given up. There was no way to stop the leak at this point. The Muggle and wizarding worlds were about to collide, and the important thing now was to make sure that the collision didn't destroy one or both of those cultures. Reaction among the boys was mixed. Some of them had heard frightening rumors about the Muggles. The fact that Dana had originally been founded by refugees from the Salem witch trials didn't help. On the other hand, the school included several students with Muggle parents. These kids seemed just like their wizarding counterparts. Furthermore, several wizarding students who had visited these children at their parents' homes out in Greenfield and Northampton had reported that the family seemed just like any wizarding family. The only exception, of course, was that they never used magic, replacing it with technology. The headmaster and staff had prepared for this moment as soon as the commercial had hit the air and double-checked them as soon as word came down that the Muggles would be having a tour of the school. Reynolds just hoped that they would be enough. Drawing a deep breath, he walked down to the gates, reaching them just as they opened to admit Secretary Radner, Professor Nagel, and the reporters. Several brave students followed him. Reynolds noted that the vast majority of the mob consisted of college-age students, only a few years older than the seniors. There were also young women among them, something which the Cass students noticed almost immediately. He'd have to keep an eye on this. He reached out and shook the secretary's hand. "Welcome to the men's campus of the Quabbin Institute of Sorcery. I'm the Muggle Studies teacher, Professor Reynolds. I'll be taking you on a tour of our facility today so you can see what a wizarding school looks like. Before we begin the tour, there are some things I should say. Many of the students have never met Muggles before, so they may be a little shy or awkward around you. Then again, I suppose you're going to be feeling us out as well. Now, with that out of the way, I should warn you that you should not touch anything without permission of myself, Professor Nagel, or Secretary Radner. There are several things here, such as wands and brooms, which can hurt people if they are used improperly. First, some background. The Quabbin Institute of Sorcery's men's school, Dana Academy, was founded in the wake of the Salem witch trials, when a breach of the statute of secrecy, a temporary one, unlike this, turned the Muggles against the wizards and resulted in the death of many wizards. The survivors were forced to move west into the towns now known as Dana, Enfield, Greenwich, and Prescott. This building is in Dana. To further protect the wizarding community from prying eyes, a wizard convinced a Boston magistrate to create the Quabbin Reservoir, so it could not only slake Bostonians' thirst, but also to make it impossible for visitors to the area to find our homes without extensive scuba gear. This allowed the wizards to move back here from New York. You may be interested to know that you are currently standing in a magical air bubble under about 300 feet of water. The Muggles started murmuring in surprise and admiration. Reynolds did, however, hear a few old people complaining that they'd been evicted from their homes just to pacify some crazy lunatics. He continued, "This school goes from 6th grade to 12th grade. The 7-year curriculum follows the standards set down in Britain by the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, one of the most ancient institutions on the planet. Students take a wide variety of classes, including potions, divination, Muggle studs, my class, arithmancy, astronomy, transfiguration." One of the Muggles smirked. "What's the point of astronomy if you're underwater and never see the sky?" Reynolds smiled. "Simple. The astronomy is used in conjunction with astrology lessons. I believe you are familiar with astrology, the ability to foretell events based on the positions of the stars and planets." The Muggle shook his head. That doesn't work. I'm an engineer, and I know it doesn't work. That's because your signs are all off, my friend. Do you know your sign? What's your birthday? I'm a Libra, October 9. Reynolds shook his head. I'm afraid not, sir. You are a Virgo. That's why your astrology doesn't work. Your signs are all off by one due to the Earth's precession. You'll need to pay more attention to the actual constellation boundaries and invoke more stars and planets to get an accurate reading. You'd be surprised to know that many people in this crowd likely fall under the sign of Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. The Muggles stared at him. Several of the young men, presumably astronomers, nodded, though. At least he'd gotten through to a few of them. It was a good start. He then pointed down the corridor towards the Great Hall. Now, if you'll follow me, we'll head into the Great Hall, where we have prepared a meal for you. I apologize that we don't have enough food to feed this many tourists. We'd only been expecting 20 or so, but we'll do whatever we can. Needless to say, the Muggles were awed by the sight. Floating candles littered the air, and the tables of the four houses were laden with gold and silver plates. All of the students were there, dressed in robes. Reynolds had the distinct impression that several of those plates would disappear before the tour ended. Staring up at the ceiling was like looking into an aquarium. Fish swam around peacefully. The Muggles were floored when they were told that they were looking up at the waters of the Quabbin. At least 2 ocean engineering students started barking at each other about the impossibility of such a feat. It didn't take long for the presence of the MIT co-eds to break the ice between the 2 groups of students, especially the Cass seniors. The food didn't hurt, either. Here and there, the word Vila appeared, capturing all of the adults' attention. Judging from the locations where the word was being spoken, there were at least 4 Vila descendants in there. After the meal, the now mingling groups of students took a tour of the building. As it was a Sunday afternoon, most of the classrooms were empty. However, Reynolds was able to point out several utensils and magical items. The group was about to leave the school when one of the Muggles screamed. The staff turned to find the crowd milling around in confusion and excitement. The Muggles were repeating one word: ghost. A few of the college students were talking about Jedis and Obi-Wans. What the hell were they? Nagel looked at Radner and shrugged. They were going to find out at some point. Might as well get it over with. Within maybe 30 seconds, the Muggles had cleared maybe a 10-foot diameter circle around a shimmering white figure. The figure appeared to be a woman in her 60s or 70s, wearing a demure Puritan-style frock and bonnet. What was even more unusual was the fact that she was floating maybe a foot above the ground, something the reporters could not fail to miss. One of the Muggles found his voice. "Who are you? Are you a ghost?" The figure spoke. "Yes, Goodman. In life, I was Goody Rebecca Nurse of Salem, Massachusetts. I was convicted on a charge of evil witchcraft in the year of our Lord 1692, even though I was a good Christian and made no pact with the devil. All the magic I performed was in the name of the Lord to help people. I have returned to make sure that such a tragedy never happens again." The Muggles stared at her and at each other. Anyone familiar with the Crucible would recognize the name, especially students who had been forced to read the book for summer reading. The rush of reporters heading towards the figure nearly masked a brief clatter as a gold plate fell from the hand of a stunned Muggle. Chapter 33. Interview with a Ghost. February 4, 1996, Quabbin Academy of Sorcery, Dana Academy, Campus Dana, Massachusetts, United States of America. Rebecca Nurse didn't think she'd seen this many people staring at her before in her entire life, either as a ghost or as a human. She also found it hard to believe that they didn't realize she was a ghost. Everyone in the 4 towns knew she existed. Granted, the Muggles didn't know she had survived the execution, but she didn't think Muggles would be allowed into the school regardless of this so-called Super Bowl breach. What in Christ's name was the Super Bowl? She had heard something odd was going on, and she had ventured from the SWI campus over to the men's school to check it out. These people were wearing most unusual and provocative clothing. Several women were wearing trousers and form-fitting clothing. Had they worn that in her day, they would very likely have been burned as rebels or witches, regardless of their magical ability. Had she done something wrong? She didn't think so. She'd just been going about her business when she'd heard lots of people in the great hall. Curious, she'd come over and become the center of attention. It was as if they'd never seen a ghost before. She looked around at all the people. Guards, wounds, ladies and gentlemen, what is the matter? Have I done something wrong? Why are you all looking at me? I swear by our Lord Jesus that I did not perform any evil magic. And what exactly are those odd metal contraptions those people are holding? Professor Nagel explained. These people, Goody Nurse, are Muggles. You are the first ghost they have ever seen. They're curious about you. She stared at him. Muggles, in here, we have been discovered and betrayed. We are lost. By our Lord Jesus Christ. Professor Reynolds chimed in. Goody Nurse, you need not fear. The Muggles have found out about our world, and the statute of secrecy has been breached to the point where it cannot be repaired. The Muggle studies teacher raised a hand to forestall her panicked scream. However, times have changed. The witch trials are over, and we believe that these Muggles have come because they want to learn about our people. If we are to coexist peacefully, we will each need to learn about each other's customs. Right now, the Muggles are touring our world. Once we finish the tour, we will be sending some of the wizards into the Muggle world, into Boston and Cambridge. She didn't know if this was good or bad. Have the Muggles tried to execute any of our people yet? No, Goody Nurse. They have not, and they will not. Like I said, times have changed. If you wish, you can come with us on our tour. When was the last time you were outside the 4 towns? Hundreds of years ago, I suspect. You probably want a change of scenery. Secretary Radner stared at Reynolds. Is that wise? They've never seen ghosts before. I don't want them overreacting. Remember, this is a first contact situation here. She really wanted to see what the world was like outside the 4 towns. However, better to be safe than sorry. She'd been betrayed by Muggles once before. She was concerned some things never changed, however. Shaking her head, she replied, I will stay here for the time being, Master Reynolds. I do not want to cause anyone to suffer because of something I did. Like our Savior, I am willing to undergo difficulties for the sake of others. Reynolds shrugged. As you wish, Goody Nurse. Now let me explain what I suspect is going to happen next. Like I said, you are the first ghost they have ever seen. These contraptions you mentioned are Muggle recording devices. They will allow other Muggles to witness these events. Muggles will very likely be interested in your experience as a ghost. They will likely ask you questions about religion and the afterlife. Would you be willing to answer them? Remember that they have never had proof of an afterlife before. She looked at the Muggles, puzzled. They doubt the Bible. The Bible clearly mentions an afterlife, and I have encountered people who have spoken of Sheol. There are several ways to interpret that passage, Goody Nurse, and the Bible isn't as well read as it once was. She stared at him, surprised. Indeed, times have changed. Well, I will do what I can to answer their questions. With that, Reynolds bowed to her courteously and backed off somewhat. Several of the people with the metal contraptions walked over as the Muggles began talking excitedly among themselves. After a few moments, one of them spoke up. How do you become a ghost? Are ghosts common? Do you have to be a wizard to become a ghost? She shrugged as the man pointed some kind of metal object at her. To be honest, I cannot remember. What I do remember is being executed for a sin I would have never committed. As my spirit was floating away, I felt a presence asking me if I had anything else to do in this world. If I so chose, I could stay behind as a ghost to continue my mission. I would be able to leave at a future time if I so chose. I would not be able to return to a corporeal body, but I would be able to manifest myself as a ghost. You spoke with God. You have seen God. She thought for a moment. I do not know, good sir. I pray that it was God. However, this presence seemed very caring yet powerful. The man with the machine pressed her further. Can you say God exists? She looked at him sharply. I have always believed he exists, good sir. I did not need this experience to support my beliefs. But did this experience give you conclusive evidence that God exists? That is, would it something that a scientist would have accepted as proof of God's existence? Something that would convince everyone? She considered this and sighed. It shames me to admit this, but I would say no. If I were a heretic or a heathen, I would not be convinced that God contacted me. From the little I know of science, I would believe that my experience would not be enough prove God's existence to an unbeliever. The reporter nodded. Sounds like a powerful spiritual experience, goody nurse. You felt a sense of peace, yet one of urgency, and you couldn't figure out where it came from. As a religious person, you believed it was God. However, you couldn't prove it, just like most of our other experiences when it comes to the existence of God. She flared at him. Where else would it have come from? One of the other reporters broke in. Goody nurse, do you believe yourself to be in heaven? Have you seen heaven? She shook her head. I never witnessed the pearly gates or the fires of hell. From what I have been told, ghosts like myself abide in Sheol, the underworld. All ghosts reside in Sheol regardless of how good or bad they were in life. Even the great prophet Samuel was sent to Sheol, and not to heaven, when he spent time as a ghost before he was summoned by Saul and the witch of Endor. When they choose to move on, they then go to heaven or hell. But have you seen proof of heaven or hell? No, however, is there any doubt they exist? Reynolds, who had apparently been expecting this, nodded and turned to the Muggles. Keep in mind that this woman was very pious during her life. She lived during the time of the Puritans, remember. Another reporter raised her hand. How do you reconcile your belief in magic with your religious traditions? Simple, m'lady. God gives various people various talents and gifts according to his divine plan. He decided to give me magic as a gift, and it is not up to me to question his decision. It is our duty to use his gifts to help improve the world. The first reporter spoke up again. Are ghosts common? Can people who are not wizards become ghosts? She shook her head. I know a few other ghosts, good sir. There aren't many, but they exist. They were all wizards. Must you be a Christian, or at least a worshipper of the God of Abraham, to become a ghost? No, there are several Indians in the ghost realm, victims of the terrible diseases which spread through the Indian communities shortly after our arrival in 1620. They, like I, have stayed behind to try to help their communities. This leads me to believe that God, in his infinite mercy, has provided the ghost realm as a last chance for people to atone for their sins and accept the Savior before God judges them. Some of the Muggles not holding contraptions began speaking. Madame, if you've come back as a ghost, why couldn't you come back to life completely? Can wizards raise the dead? No, they cannot. Only God and our Savior could. How about providing eternal youth? Not easily. There is an elixir of life which can prolong life, but it must be drunk consistently to prevent aging. Furthermore, this elixir will not prevent the drinker from being injured or killed. The Muggles sounded excited as the reporter continued. Do you have any of this elixir? Do you know how to make it? No, good sir. Another reporter broke in. You have been a ghost for the past 300 years. How does our world seem to someone who was born almost 400 years ago? Very different, m'lady. Very different. The women's clothing would have caused them to be burned as witches or prostitutes in my day. However, I am optimistic. It is clear that nowadays people are much more tolerant. These women can wear trousers and not be burned, and they can keep their hair uncovered and not be stoned. Muggles have reached the point where they are willing to be tolerant of wizards. From the little I know, I'd be optimistic about the future. I suspect I would have not been accused of evil magic nowadays. She thought a little longer. Had this era not been so secular, I would say that we were close to entering God's kingdom. We may not be there yet, But I would suspect that we are much closer than I first thought possible. I suspect that we need no longer fear his final judgment. Chapter 34. The Wizards Return the Favor. February 4, 1996. H. Entry J. Entry Corridor McGregor House, 450 Memorial Drive, Cambridge, Massachusetts, United States of America. The corridor was deserted by the time the I-entry doors swung open. It was now almost 6:00, and most of the students were either heading to the student center or the convenience store to eat dinner. As a result, no one immediately noticed the most unusual procession which suddenly began trooping out of what was supposed to have been a brick wall. But it didn't take the remaining H-entry and J-entry students long to figure out something was up. It wasn't often that 500 people suddenly appeared out of nowhere, blocking the corridors. Inevitably, word leaked out that these were the tourists who had entered the wizard realm. People made phone calls, and by the time the last students had made it out of the I-entry doors, there were representatives from the Tech Talk, and Technology Review. Harvard students were on their way as well. A woman with a Russian accent led a large group of Wiccans over to the building from the dormitory next door. Curiously, a large wizard's hat had appeared on the 77 Massachusetts Avenue dome, complete with lighting so it could be seen at night. The students loved it, of course. No one knew where it had come from. The authorities looked at it nervously, however. For all they knew, real witches did not wear hats like this and could find it offensive. A heated debate ensued as to whether the new decoration should be removed. The witnesses' eyes shot up as the parade of students was followed by several people in very strange dress. Most of them were wearing robes of odd colors. Ominously, none of them were wearing hats. A campus police officer barked into his communicator and turned to the dome just in time to see the lights turned off. The students groaned. Most of the cops understood the playful nature of the hacks, but in this case diplomacy was involved, and it wasn't a laughing matter. Maxwell Finch blinked as he emerged from the corridor. He found himself in an environment unlike anything he'd seen before. He was in a hallway of some sort. There were odd lights in the ceiling, wall-to-wall carpeting on the floor, and several doors with placards on them consisting of the letter H, followed by a number. This must be an office of some sort, perhaps an area the Muggles had set up to welcome the wizards to their realm. All of the wizards were moving forward down the corridor. The corridor continued in the opposite direction, however. Craning his neck to look behind him, he saw a door with a J placard and some men in uniforms who looked nothing like the Muggles he had seen. The men in uniforms seemed to be trying to keep other Muggles, dressed like the people he had met, under control. He brought out his camera to take a picture of the corridor. Muggles gestured excitedly. He pushed the button, and there was a brief flash as the photograph started recording. So far, so good. Half a second later, the lights adjacent to him in the corridor went out. He winced. What did he do? He didn't mean to wreck the lights. He was just trying to take a picture. The Muggles in the uniforms suddenly started staring at him. He had to say something. "I'm sorry, sirs. I don't know what I did. I took a picture with my camera and the lights went out around me. The camera seems to be working fine, though. Here, I'll help you out. Lumos." The wand light turned on, but it didn't do anything to bring the lights back. He hoped he wasn't in trouble. He continued on until he was back into the lighted area of the corridor and pulled out his wand again. Knocks. The wand light went out, as did a few more lights. Several of the wizards muttered nervously at this. Were these lights designed to detect magic? How had the Muggles developed such technology without knowing about the wizards? His thoughts were interrupted by a swear from beyond, no fewer than 3 of the H-marked doors, followed by irritated comments that various somethings weren't working. Oh dear, he thought. It appeared that his spells were wrecking the Muggles' equipment. He'd need to check his wand out. Discretion was the best part of valor, so he put his wand in his pocket, deactivated his camera, and followed the rest of the wizards down the corridor. He passed through another area of broken lights Apparently someone else had tried to cast a spell. Odd, he thought. It wasn't his wand then. It sounded like something about magic broke Muggles' technology. Wait a minute, he thought. The Muggles' recording equipment had worked during their half of the tour, and everyone had been casting spells there. Shouldn't their equipment have broken there as well? Maybe the wizards knew how to prevent the Muggles' machinery from breaking. The corridor twisted and turned, passing many more H-marked doors. Progress was slow, with all the people passing through the narrow space. Eventually, though, they came to a door leading outside. He walked through the door. It was evening. He was on what appeared to be a platform or walkway attached to a building surrounding a central courtyard. The building was 4 stories high near him. However, there appeared to be a much taller, box-shaped tower across the courtyard from him. He whistled. He didn't think he'd ever seen a tower that tall before. The Muggles seemed to have very impressive technology. The central courtyard was filled with Muggles chatting excitedly and clapping as the wizards emerged from the building. He wanted to look around more, but there were people still coming out behind him. He stepped aside so that the rest of the wizards could come out. Several of them had pieces of parchment in their hands. Others had recording devices. The wizards walked down the corridor and down some stairs, where they were greeted by some impressive-looking Muggles in suits. One of the Muggles shook Secretary Radnor's hand. "Welcome, Mr. Secretary. I'm the mayor of Cambridge, and this fellow here is the president of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It's been an honor to meet your acquaintance, and I hope we will be able to work together and learn from each other in the future." Everyone cheered as Radnor nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The feeling is mutual." "How many people do you have on the tour?" "About 50, sir. They're all excited. I've seen evidence that a few have tried to cast spells. Muggle technology tend to not work well when wizards are casting spells. I'm going to have to tell everyone not to cast spells while near Muggle technology." The mayor scratched his head. "But didn't our television cameras work? I was able to watch the tour from my office. Most fascinating, especially the interview with Mrs. Nurse." "They did, Mr. Mayor. And yes, there is a way Muggle equipment can be protected from magic. However, it requires that we release a colorless, harmless gas into the air surrounding the equipment to be protected." The mayor was intrigued. "Intriguing. Is the gas magical?" "No, it is normally part of air, but at too low a concentration to help your equipment. We extracted some and spread it throughout the 4 towns in preparation for your arrival. I believe the term you use for it is argon-38. The Muggles chattered excitedly at this. Apparently they knew what this gas was. This was a good sign. He'd be able to cast spells again soon. The mayor nodded. "Argon-38, that's a noble gas, isn't it? Intriguing. I'll see what can be done. In the meantime, here's the plan. You are on the campus of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a Muggle center for the study of science and technology. We're going to walk down to the student center, where we have prepared a meal for you. After that, we're going to head down into the school itself, and I'll show you some of the laboratories and so forth. We'll then take you over to a hotel, the Cambridge Marriott, where you can relax. Tomorrow, we're going to take you on a tour of Cambridge and Boston and show you some of the sights. I hope you'll like it. Our party will be much smaller, though, as most of the people you see around you are students at the Institute." One of the other wizards smiled. "Interesting. Is Harvard College still in business? It was a great center of Muggle learning at the time our community was founded." The mayor nodded. "It's still here, sir, maybe 3 miles away or so. It's probably the most prestigious school in the United States. They are already expecting you tomorrow." Several of the younger Muggles grumbled at this. Apparently these young Muggles did not like Harvard very much. Maxwell frowned. If these people were students, wouldn't they revere Harvard as much as this school? Radnor nodded. "Sounds fine with us. Lead the way." The mayor nodded. "As you wish, Mr. Secretary. Follow me, and please do not use magic for the time being." With that, the men started walking around the corner and down the street past the high tower. Maxwell was a bit sad he couldn't record everything he was seeing. Look at these towers. Look at all these strangely dressed people. Up ahead, the Secretary of Magic narrowed his eyes and started. Ha! Am I imagining something, or is that a wizard's hat on that fine building over there? It is difficult to see. The president of the institute paused for a moment. He sighed and put his head in his hands. Finally, he nodded. Yes, that is what we Muggles believe a wizard's hat looks like. We did it to welcome you to our world. Is it accurate? Radner looked at it more carefully. Actually, no. It doesn't look at all like a wizard's hat. However, that's understandable, Mr. President. At the time you made the display, you hadn't taken the tour, and as a result, didn't know what a wizard's hat truly looked like. We appreciate the gesture, though. It shows that you are sincere about your desire to blend our communities. The president stared at Radner and breathed a sigh of relief. That's good to hear. Now, let's go. This building here is the Delta Psi Fraternity, also known as the Number 6 Club. Maxwell smiled. A place with no fewer than 6 clubs. A place which tried to welcome wizards with a hat on one of their buildings. The Muggles seemed very friendly. The wizards had nothing to worry about. Chapter 35. The Dursley Effect. February 5, 1996. Dursley Burgess, Household Westboro, Kansas, United States of America. Patrick Dursley Burgess stared at the monitor in disbelief. The wizards were about to take over the world, and no one knew it. Why else would they have conveniently exposed themselves at this point? Had he been one of the wizards, he would have waited until they had developed a foolproof plan for world domination before announcing their existence to the world. The Bible clearly stated that the faithful were not allowed to let a witch live. God had decreed that the witches be destroyed, and one did not question his words. They were right in front of him, in black and white. They weren't going to fool someone who read the Bible a lot. He had watched as President Clinton and the minion of the Antichrist appeared on live TV and tried to convince America that these witches could be trusted. Most of the people believed him. However, Nigel didn't. In a debate between God and a secular leader, whom was he supposed to trust? The explanation for the president's behavior was simple. This so-called Secretary of Magic had ensorcelled him before the interview. Although he had personally not voted for Clinton in 1992 and planned to vote against him in November, he was still the president and had to be obeyed and respected as such. Yet how was he supposed to obey a president who was no longer acting in the best interest of his people? How was he supposed to follow the laws of someone who was but a front for a wizard army? The signs pointing to the wizards being agents of the devil were everywhere. For Christ's sake, the Pope had come out as a wizard. He had never been particularly fond of Catholics. Now he had good reason to be even less fond of them. How many Catholics could be wizards in disguise, waiting to unleash their spells on an unsuspecting population? He had thought the president's original speech had been problematic. It paled, however, in comparison to the footage currently being shown on the primetime news. Not only were schools supposedly dedicated to science linked to the witches, but secret witch enclaves were hidden all over the place. One of them had been situated under Boston's primary water supply. It was perfectly positioned to poison the city's drinking water or cast a spell on it, which would turn all of the residents into zombies. Patrick had been troubled by the interview with the ghost most of all. Not only was it possible for the wizards to stop aging, this elixir of life she had referred to, but once you killed them, they wouldn't stay dead. What were mortals supposed to do against a threat like what? The only person who'd be able to deal with people who could rise from the dead would be the Lord Jesus Christ, who had done so himself. This meant that the world would be in deep trouble until that happened. The Bible had several clear passages referring to the mark of the beast. Wizarding ability seemed to fit the bill pretty well. It was easy to identify and, in theory, could have been used for good. Sure. And the Antichrist was supposed to be a very popular and charismatic figure before he turned on the world. He made a mental note to start watching the missing persons lists. If lots of people disappeared all at once, the rapture had taken place. He was a righteous man, and therefore he believed that the rapture would take him. However, he could not rely on miracles. As a result, he had to consider the possibility that he would be left behind and be forced to deal with the tribulation. Although someone like him would almost certainly make it through the tribulation and be present at the second coming, he at least wanted to be prepared so he wouldn't suffer all that much. Perhaps Christ would ease his burden if he joined the fight against the agents of darkness. He had tried to warn several people. However, very few people had believed him. They had argued that the wizards had shown no indication that they harbored ill will towards their fellow Americans. Poor souls, he thought. Perhaps they had been ensorcelled as well. They were not strong enough in Jesus to be able to survive the devil's brainwashing. His cousin Vernon had described several of the horrors wizards could do. Vernon was still in England, raising his precious son Dudley, along with that cuckoo egg Harry Potter. Vernon had explained that Harry had always been a bit strange, and had hoped that Harry would never be trained as a wizard. The wizards had found him, however, and begun training him 4 years ago. The results, of course, had been ghastly. Vernon's sister Marge had been inflated like a balloon and floated out the window. Birthday cakes had gone flying on magical propulsion. And worst of all, Harry had repaid Dudley's brotherhood by using magic to seal him in a zoo exhibit with a snake. Later on, after Harry had learned how to use his wand, the budding warlock had tortured Dudley with some horrible sight under a bridge in England. Patrick didn't know what it was, but whatever it had been had scared the hell out of Dudley. There had been weird lights flying around and an awful chill in the air. The infraction had been serious enough for the Antichrist's officers themselves to tell Harry to cool it for the time being. The time had not yet come for them to spring their trap. That had been in August or thereabouts. Fast forward to last week, when a commercial featuring none other than Harry Potter aired during the Super Bowl. The time had come for the wizards to act. They had finally released Harry Potter and his agents upon the world of normal people. Patrick could understand why everyone had been so easily fooled. He probably would have been fooled himself 10 years ago when he had moved from England to the Gulf Coast to be closer to his girlfriend, who had been a teacher there at the time. Shortly after his arrival, Yolanda, now his wife, had discovered Reverend Pitmoss and been saved. She had immediately tried to convince him of God's word. After all, his soul had been at stake. Caught off guard, the devil had managed to fend off the messenger's first few attempts. Eventually, though, Jesus came to him and allowed him to hear his wife's good news. Patrick was now saved and aware of the truth. He would not be fooled again, for God was with him. Tomorrow, he would get in touch with the other people who knew the truth and found the inaugural chapter of America for Humans, or AF. God had chosen him to get the word out, and he would do so. Chapter 36. Deirdre Goes to the Zoo. February 6, 1996, the White House, Washington, DeC, United States of America. It was fairly obvious now that the unicorn was pretty good at getting the gardener into trouble, that was. Secretary Radner had been correct saying that Deirdre was vegetarian and would eat everything with leaves. Unfortunately, the White House garden was filled with trees and bushes. These plants had shed many leaves during the winter, covering the ground with a carpet of brown. The ground was now missing many of those leaves, and at the rate things were going, their President Clinton's successor would likely inherit a garden with maybe 2-3 of the trees it had had only a few weeks ago. As if that were not bad enough, the cute little animal had just discovered that the dry grass under her feet was almost as tasty as the bushes. A large section of the garden looked as if it had been mown by a professional gardening operation, with the grass a good inch or 2 shorter than it was on the rest of the grounds. The arrival of Deirdre had pushed socks into the background, something the poor cat was not particularly thrilled about. Virtually all of the foreign dignitaries visiting the White House had wanted to be photographed with the unicorn. The Secret Service hadn't been particularly fond of the idea. Deirdre seemed to be relatively tame, at least at the moment. How long she would remain so, however, was anyone's guess. No one on the White House staff knew anything about unicorns. For all they knew, the animal would go through a more aggressive phase as she got older. Radner had refused to spay the animal, arguing that the species was endangered and that fixing animals was cruel. All she had to do was ram her rapidly growing horn into the guts of the ambassador from Japan, and the United States would have an international incident on its hands. Deirdre's blood sample had been forwarded to scientists at Johns Hopkins University. Although the testing was still incomplete, they had made a decent amount of progress thanks to the help of the wizards. It appeared that unicorn was indeed an equine, part of the horse family. However, their unicorn had several traits which didn't seem remotely equine. The single large horn wasn't at all horse-like. Neither was the bluish-white blood. No one could make any sense out of that. And who would have thought that the animal would be evolving what appeared to be a pure gold coat? There weren't any gold horses. Preliminary DNA testing had revealed that there were parts of the animal's genetic sequence which involved nucleotides other than a T, C, and G. The scientists had no idea what to make of them and began calling them Q and Z. Biologists suspected that they had to do with magic ability, but they had no way to prove it. After all, Muggles had no way to cast magic spells at Q and Z cultures to see how they reacted. Right now, the owner of the aforementioned Q and Z complexes was busy munching away on an apple tree which had been there for over 100 years. The gardener threw his hands up in the air. That animal had to go. This was the White House, not a zoo. He could understand keeping the cat in the building. That made sense, and it didn't wreck the garden. The gardener smiled as an idea came to him. The National Zoo probably knew how to take care of animals like this. They had lions, bears, and more than enough kinds of horses. Granted, Chelsea would probably have a fit. She had grown quite attached to the unicorn. He suspected, however, that the president would agree with him and have the zoo adopt the animal. First, the zoo could take care of her more than the White House staff. Second, she would likely be placed with other horses, who would likely be able to relate to her better than humans. Excited, he hurried back into the White House and called the Oval Office. It took a while, but he eventually got through to the president. The gardener cleared his throat and explained, "Mr. President, I was wondering if I could make a suggestion concerning the unicorn. Is now a good time, sir?" The president laughed. "Mr. Rourke, there's never a good time when you're president. I'm swamped most of the time. However, I think I can take a few minutes. What's wrong with her?" "I don't think we're going to be able to take care of her much longer, sir. She's a growing animal and is very hungry. She's already made it through most of the fallen leaves and is starting to work on the grass. At the rate things are going, you're going to wind up with a barren wasteland back here by the time your term is over. Dole, or whoever your successor is, won't be happy." The president thought for a moment. "Can't you import some hay or something like that? What did our predecessors do in the age of horses and buggies?" "We could, sir. However, that's just part of the problem. I don't know how to take care of animals, and the White House doesn't have stables anymore. I'm the gardener, not a zookeeper, and I doubt even a zookeeper would know exactly what to do with this animal. Is he supposed to treat her like a horse? Is he supposed to put her with the rest of the horses?" The president paused for a moment. "I see your point. What are you thinking?" The gardener took a deep breath. "This animal is a gift to the American people, sir. It belongs in the National Zoo. They've got people who know how to take care of all different sorts of horses, so she'll have a decent shot there. Furthermore, everyone will be able to see her there and relish in her beauty. The people will be happy. You'll be seen as doing a good thing for the country in an election year, and Deirdre will have a better chance at survival than she would have if we cared for her." He continued, "There's more, sir, unless I'm mistaken. The wizards have many other animals running around which we find mythical. How much would you be willing to bet, mister?" President, that fairies, the Loch Ness Monster, dinosaurs, dragons, Bigfoot, and various other cryptozoological specimens actually exist, but have been hidden up to this point by the wizard's statute of secrecy. The president conceded that. Judging from what I've heard from Secretary Radner, that is a distinct possibility. My thoughts exactly, sir. My recommendation is that we have someone talk to the National Zoo and have them set up a wing devoted to magical creatures. The unicorn could be the first exhibit in this wing. Next time you see Secretary Radner, ask him for more creatures. If the purpose of the zoo is to show the guest the wonders of the animal kingdom, there isn't a better place for her or any other magical creature. The president thought about it. You know, Mr. Rourke, that's a damn good idea. My daughter won't be happy about it, but I think I'll be able to convince her. As far as the zoo goes, I doubt they'd be willing to house dragons, but cute little animals like Deirdre should be a big draw. What's more, I've been told that several magical schools have care of magical creatures courses which train wizards on the handling of magical creatures. The zoo could hire one of their wizards. The gardener smiled. A wizard trained in dealing with magical creatures. That would be even better than an ordinary zookeeper, sir. He may have creatures of his own to put on display. The president laughed. I can't agree more, Mr. Rourke. Furthermore, from what Secretary Radner has told me, the Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in England has a care of magical creatures instructor who will fit quite well, both as an employee and as an exhibit. Really? How so? He's a half-giant. Now, if you'll excuse me, duty calls. I'll forward your suggestion off to the appropriate people. The president hung up, leaving the gardener wondering if Clinton was joking or not about the half-giant. It was plausible, however. Those half-giants could have been a species of Bigfoot. Very interesting. A soft crunch next to him betrayed Deirdre the unicorn munching on a tree root. The tree already looked half dead, and this was not going to help.